I am a full professor of corporate finance here at Turin University since 2 Julys ago. Okay, previously I had been elsewhere. My alma mater is Bocconi University, which is a university located in Milan, where I got my Master of Science. Well, actually, at that time it was the so-called laurea quadriennale, and then the PhD in Business Administration and Management. And I spent 1 year at New York University, Stern School of Business, for my PhD program. Then I came back first at the University of Venice, whose name is Ca' Foscari. Then back again in my alma mater as an assistant professor of finance in Bocconi. Then I went abroad, more specifically in France, for 4 years. And I was simultaneously appointed at a school, well, mainly at a school, in a school that is located in Lyon, whose name is École de Management Lyon, AM Lyon. But simultaneously, I had also an appointment with another school that is located, let's say, outside Paris, whose name is HEC, in Paris, and Paris-Sorbonne Panthéon, which is in Saint-Germain, in Paris. So that was a rather busy period, I must say. Then I came back. Nostalgia got me. And the only, we could say, concorso that was available in 2010 for a full professor position was at the University of Bari, which is located in the south of Italy. I had a chance of winning it. And then I stayed there 10 years, more or less, 10 years, where I also had the position as the dean of the faculty for 8 out of the 10 years. And then finally, I came back to the north of Italy. I live in Milan with my family in Milan, so it was definitely better to stay in Turin, which is, if I may say, a more prestigious university compared to the previous one. And secondly, that's not that less important, closer to Milan, where that's the city where I live. I do some advisory activity as well on the topics, mainly on the topics that we're gonna cover these days, okay, but on a rather selective basis, defending some, if I may say, important institutions against others on corporate finance matters. I've been the author of some publications, okay, not at the level of our co-lecture that I'm going to present you in a while, Heitor Almeida. More specifically, there's a couple of textbooks that go around, one in Italy, the other one throughout the world, that are quite widespread among the public. That one, exactly, that one, the one that you have. You want to show it to the rest of the classroom? This one, this brick. She had the courage of buying it. Thank you very much, by the way, on behalf of all the others. It's a beautiful book. It's an excellent book. But I say that for a very simple reason, because I'm the author of 1/4 of the book. And the best parts of that book are those that have not written by myself. The other 3 parts are absolutely amazing, especially the first one is, I believe it's a very brilliant one. It was written by Pascal Curie, so it is fair if I say that. That concerns myself. Now, as I told you, I'm going to present you the rest of the team, if I may say. There are 2 guys which are here with us, Niccolò Nirino and Francesco Martielli. Niccolò Nirino has just got his PhD here at Turin. He comes from Pinerolo and he's a very brilliant guy. As well as Francesco is, but Francesco is younger than Niccolò. Francesco has just started his PhD program here at the University of Turin. And they will be supporting me together with Felice Petruzzella, which is following us from home. It's a rather big team for this course. Felice Petruzzella is an associate professor of finance university close to Napoli, in the city that was named for the Italians know it, non-Italians may not necessarily know it. The city is Benevento, Università di Benevento.
Thank you, Mr. Savi. Good morning at all.
This is the guy. Felice, this phantom that spoke.
Good morning.
You can see him. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Felice Petruzzella is a close friend and also an associate professor of corporate finance.
Thank you.
But the most important news concerning this course this year is the presence of Heitor Almeida, this guy here, which is a full professor of finance, very well known in the corporate finance world, and he has been appointed recently. Recently means last January, if I remember correctly. He has been appointed as editor-in-chief, which is number one, responsible of a very important journal that is Journal of Corporate Finance. Okay, it's top tier journal, and I'm particularly proud of having him here next week with you. He will be covering 14 hours of our course, while unfortunately from you, 21 hours will be shared with me. Okay, so the total course is overall 35 hours. Well, around 2/3 are by myself, maybe less than 2/3, I'm sorry, and the rest is held by Professor Almeida. He's reaching us from US next week. He's gonna come here, I think, on you have on Thursday, right? First lesson with him. He's gonna arrive on Wednesday, yeah. And it's an absolutely unique occasion of meeting a very important leading scholar around the planet, I would say. What are the parts that I will be covering, and what are the parts that Heitor Almeida is going to cover about this course? Advanced Corporate Finance is basically, the way we have structured it, is basically a corporate financial policies course. Corporate financial policies course. And it's a course that is ideally divided into two parts. The first part, which is my part, deals with capital structure decisions. Okay? The way companies decide to finance themselves. Okay? We will explore this important part of corporate finance that deserves a certain number of hours in order to be covered appropriately. We will be dealing with the mix of debt equity in the financing of a firm, but also in designing the details of debt within the capital structure. So we will go rather into details. My part will also see the discussion, the preparation, the discussion of two cases that are mentioned here. The first one is Diageo case study, and the second one is Promodes case study. Both should have been uploaded on the platform. They have been uploaded on the platform, so you have them. The first one, Diageo, is a case that concerns the number one company on this planet dealing with alcoholic beverage. Okay, it's a company that you surely know, because a lot of the most important alcoholic beverage brands are owned by this firm. We'll see that. And it's a case on where should we position as Diageo managers our company in terms of the capital structure. Okay, and how much debt should we have? The second case, the Promodes case study, is a case that has been written by myself while I was in France. It's a case concerning a company no longer existing because it was taken over by Carrefour. Okay, but at that time, this company, Promodes, issued a convertible bond, a bond that could be converted into shares. And we're going to deal with this issue of convertible bonds made by this company in order to observe the financial peculiarities and features of this specific issue. Okay, so two cases which will be prepared and discussed in classroom. Unfortunately, well, we'll see what happens. It depends if I go long on some of the topics, and then probably you can read the case at home. We'll see if we have time to prepare the case in the classroom, or if you have to do it elsewhere, which means presumably at home. Um, the only concern that I have, and believe me, I don't know how to deal with it. If you have suggestions, they are highly welcome. Is that if the 100% of the participants are here, you can make small groups, arrange small groups, and work on cases as at least myself, I was used to do. But if some of you are here, others are at home, there are no groups. There's no such thing as a group. In order to organize the groups would be so complex that I don't even think of starting this process. It's even difficult you've seen it, to manage this one in the classroom. Imagine 10 groups at home. Forget it. Okay, so this is the price that we're paying to the COVID. One of the prices we're paying to the COVID. Heitor Almeida is going to cover basically three things, as you can see here. First one, how firms issue securities, which is a rather important topic for a couple of reasons. The first one, because it strongly affects, in many circumstances, the choice that the companies make concerning their financing. A lot of exactly as the case I was mentioning regarding the group works, something similar happens within the firms. If an issuance is so complex, one possibility on the table is so complex in terms of the procedure that needs to be followed in order to achieve the final result, a lot of companies may decide to abandon that path in order to benefit an alternative one, which turns out to be more simple. Okay, so how to issue securities, the timing, the pricing, the intermediaries being involved in the issuance, the advisors, and so on and so forth, as you may easily understand, may deeply affect the final decision of the firm. Okay, and this is something that needs to be covered in order to have an overall view of the actual drivers of corporate financing decisions. Second part, and this is a pity for me, because this is a part that I love a lot, but it is something that is going to be presented by Hater, the payout policy. If you don't like the word payout policy, let's say dividend distributions. How much should company distribute, if any, of the earnings earned in this year and in the previous years? And how do you do that? How do you distribute cash that you have accumulated over the years? Companies, especially some companies these days, think about Amazon, think about Tesla, think about Apple, think about Johnson & Johnson, think about Exxon, think about many companies, trust me, they are accumulating a pile of cash. Like Uncle Scrooge, you remember, those of you, well, I think you have seen Uncle Scrooge diving into the money of his deposit, right? That's exactly what's happening with some companies. But at some time, companies may decide to say, you know what, the level of cash that we have in our deposits is extremely high. We need to reduce this level, which means distributing or extracting from the company excess cash. Let me repeat, excess cash that you don't need for daily purposes. The question is, how do we extract this cash from our company? And there are various alternatives for answering to this question. There are the traditional dividends, those that we all have in our mind. There are the extraordinary dividends. There are the share buybacks. There are various alternatives that companies may follow. And our editor is going to explain you the pros and cons of each of them. Finally, is also going to share with you some important elements of corporate financial risk management that mainly deal with, suppose that our company has finally decided to go for an issuance of bonds at a floating interest rate. Floating interest rate. But at the same time, our company wants to hedge against the adverse fluctuations of the interest rates. How can we hedge this interest rate risk? it's a part of the overall decision that the company sometimes takes for when structuring the overall liability policy. And so it's a natural ending of the course that Hader is gonna present to you, share with you. Okay, that's the idea. Concerning the readings and the materials and similar stuff, as your colleague, and I thank you very much, was implicitly suggesting by showing you, we have a reference textbook, which is the one that you see here, Corporate Finance Theory and Practice, that was written by 4 authors. Pascal Curie and Yann Le Fur, they belong to HEC. Maurizio Dall'Occhio, Bocconi University, and Antonio Salvi, Turin University. Okay, we wrote this book 4 years ago. It was the 5th edition. So we started many years ago. And it's a reference textbook that, in case you believe it is important to have a reference textbook, it's suggested. Okay, it's not compulsory, it's suggested. Then there are the slides that myself and presumably Hater have. My slides are already on the platform, so Hater hasn't sent them to us so far. If and when he decides to do that, we will upload them. And the case studies. I don't see any case study. It doesn't seem that Hader is presenting any case studies. So the case studies are basically 2 and will be presented by myself, Promodes and Diageo. Okay? The exam. The exam will be written. That's something that you already know. The duration is going to be maximum 60 minutes. Okay, 60 minutes. And that's it. I will tell you about the format of the exam more precisely, presumably tomorrow or Friday. Okay, so in due time. If my memory helps me, and it helps me saying the correct things, last year we had a 100% multiple choice exam. Correct, Nicolo? The impression that I have, it's an impression, okay, is that we're gonna keep the format unchanged. Okay? But we'll see. If in these 24 hours I change my mind, I will let you know. Okay? But the impression means that today, given this weather, and given the beauty of your faces, I will keep the things unchanged. In case I go back home and my wife treats me badly, so you know who the responsible is, we'll change the format. But I hope it won't, because as you may easily understand, I hope you understand that, multiple choices is maybe not exactly pedagogically that beautiful, and I understand that, but on the other side, it's something that students do appreciate. Okay? How many of you are actually attending the course? Let's say we said around 30 here and at home? 50. Where do you see that? 50, so 80 people. Yeah, definitely no open questions. No, Madonna. No, I'm not gonna correct 80 open questions, presumably receiving emails of the following tone. Antonio, if you are badly educated, Professor Salvi, I say it's wrong. Okay, the answer is wrong. I say, no, but I was saying you interpreted wrongly my words. I wanted to say white and I wrote black. No, let's multiple choices. We don't leave room for interpretations, personal feelings, and so on and so forth, of which after 30 years I'm a little bit fed up. Okay? Sorry for that, but on the other side, as I told you, if somebody had told me it's a multiple choice, I would have jumped on the wheel. Oh, wow, that's great, I can copy. That's the impression that I have. But you are very ethical, and so you don't even think about this possibility, right? That's it. Is there something else that I'm missing? You want to ask something? Well, let me do a rapid poll of the participants here. How many of you here are Italians? But let's put it the other way around. Who is non-Italian? Ah, aspetta un attimo, aspetta, interessante. Where do you come from, madam? Brava. When did you arrive? When did you arrive here? Ah, okay, okay. Thank you very much. Madam? Yes. Serbia. When did you arrive here in Torino? Ah, so you're a newcomer. Bravo. You like the city? Your colleagues? No, come? No, you don't say that. Come on, say, no, they are amazing. They're amazing. Thank you very much. What is your name? Tan, sorry. You? Alexandra? Then there are another couple of hands. You? Sorry? Oh, bravo. Where exactly? Oh, bravo. Molto bene. You speak Italian? When did you arrive here in Torino? The beginning of September, so quite recently. Okay. Do you like the city? No. Sì, sì, sì. È così. I agree. You. Oh. May I ask you as a group, I mean, why did you decide to come to Turin and not elsewhere? You like it? You never go back to Germany. And I ask you to go back, right? People are nice, friendly, food is good, the cities are beautiful, the weather except today is okay. You want more? I'm sorry? And now it's November. Normally it goes this way, right? So welcome to all of you, my dear friends. Okay. By the way, those of you who are at home, in case, as I do expect that it's gonna happen, you wanna intervene during the classes, don't write in the chat. Don't. For a couple of reasons, or actually one reason, because I don't read. And it's very simple. So if you write and you're gonna feel a little bit frustrated because I don't answer, it's not because I don't want to answer, it's because I don't see. I'm looking at you, I don't see what's on the screen, and I don't want to see. Okay, I want to look at you in the eyes. Okay, I don't want to see the screen. So, in case, again, warmly welcome. You want to intervene, switch on the mic, not the video in order to avoid. No, if you want to show yourself on the video, we would appreciate if you are, behaving normally and just speak. Say, Antonio, may I ask you something? May I intervene? May I say, absolutely, you are welcome. But you have to speak, okay? Now, today, as you know, we have classes till 4 p.m. I have the train at 4:35. So let's start from the serious stuff. So it means that we will end by 4. Don't even think that I'm going longer than 4 p.m. I'm not that kind of guy. We're gonna end probably some minutes earlier because I don't want to rush to go into the train station. I wouldn't say a lazy guy. I'm not a lazy guy, but I'm talking to our friend. What's your name? The German guy. Mark. Maximilian. I thought Marx, like the philosopher Max. Why Why was I mentioning you? I don't remember. By the way, I know because you were mentioning the fact that you wanted to observe a different culture, which makes perfect sense. You have in front of you a radically different culture from yours because I am Neapolitan. Neapolitans, they don't want to run to the train station. Why should I run? I end the lesson a little bit earlier. And I go, I wouldn't say slowly, but at a normal pace. That's exactly what's going to happen. Okay, well, so we're going to end by 4 so that Nicolo could drive me to the train station. That's No, I'm not saying that he's my chauffeur, but he's a nice guy. He's a nice guy. So, because he needs, the real thing is that that's a good excuse for him to leave the university earlier. I need to go to the train station to bring Antonio there, but actually normally he would leave at 5:36. So today he leaves earlier and he goes to the gym. Where do you go? Nowhere. He sleeps. Okay, as usual. So that's it, my dear friends. If you agree with that, I would stop sharing with you the syllabus, and I would go directly to the slides. The first set of slides is this one. Do you have it on the platform? Okay. So we're gonna deal with the capital structure decision. Okay. Oh, by the way, ending with the overall organization of the morning of the day, I would say now it's 10:40. We have started with our meeting at formally at 10. Presumably you're gonna have a coffee or whatever break at 11:30. Is that okay for you? Then a second one, a lunch break at 1. And then from 2 to 4, well, it's up to you. If I see that you fall asleep after 15 minutes, we'll take a break, not for a coffee break. It's going to be a toilet break to wash our. If you resist, we're going to go ahead, okay? So that we can leave a little bit earlier. I think it's a good deal. Is that okay for you? You have other classes after 4? No, so it's a good deal. Let me repeat, because I see that you are a little bit skeptical. We start at 2. We should end at 4, but in the meantime, there should be 10 minutes break, 2 hours. You know that the average, it's called the curve of attention. The average curve of attention has been experienced. It's been tested. It's not my opinion. After 35 minutes, you lose the attention of people. No matter even if you're taking a striptease or whatever, you lose it. It's gone. No matter if you have Brad Pitt in front of you, and it's not the case, it's something that you don't get it. So imagine 2 hours. 2 hours is going to be impossible on finance. Impossible. It's impossible because this is boring stuff. Questa è una magistrale in finanza? Ah no, so there's even something worse than finance. Okay. Why did you choose this one? I mean, this is really a boomerang. Normally, when you give lectures of finance within, let's say, a marketing or strategic program, you really start with a handicap because finance is boring. It is. But if it is within business administration, accounting, and these things, it's okay. It's a good course. You can follow it. Okay. By the way, guys, do you have any questions? About what, Antonio? No, quando su che cosa? Non si sa. No, you don't have questions because there's nothing to ask so far. So, oh, there is one. What? We have it. You have it. When do you have it? Oh yes, it's on 5th. Yeah. Felice told me it's gonna be. Correct me if I'm wrong. The 15th. What do you want to know? You have it. It's a pass or fail, right? Yeah. What do you want to know? We're gonna collect infos and we'll be back to you tomorrow morning. Merchant banking. Mi cogliete impreparato, dico la verità. Cioè, devo informarmi. Prendiamo informazioni. A chi chiediamo? A Lorenzo. We're gonna ask. Frankly, I don't know. So let me ask, and I will tell you. Rather than saying lies, let me inform and. Okay. So. Oh, it's okay. It's okay. We're gonna collect the infos during the coffee break, and we'll tell you something. Is that okay? So, siete sfogati? Calm down. Don't get excited for an exam. Other things should excite you, not an exam, come on. Ma questo è antifurto? Ma mi impressiona sta cosa. Are you back here? Is that okay? Okay. My part of the course, as I was telling you, deals with capital structure decisions. Okay? Well, actually, this course I cannot write anywhere. Well, let me tell you something, and you will immediately know how to, to write it down appropriately in your notes. This is a course on corporate financial. It's called Advanced Corporate Finance, but actually is de facto a course on corporate financial policies. Corporate financial policies, in turn, is made up of two subtopics: capital structure decisions, and dividend policy or payout policies. Okay, my part of the course is on this side, on this branch of the analysis, not the payout policy. We saw that. Payout policy is in the hands of Heitor Almeida. My part is in the capital structure branch of corporate financial policies. Okay? Actually, not only my part, but also part of Heitor, the first part, how corporations issue securities, is de facto part of the ending part of my part. Sorry for. I'm sorry, I have a little bit COVID, but it's okay. It's a little bit. So, what was I saying? So, I'm on the capital structure part. What it is about? I mean, what do we mean with capital structure choice? Antonio, which is my name. It's very simple. And it deals with. Suppose that I have a balance sheet. Okay, I am a square. Actually, I am a square. A square. Left side, asset side. Right side, liability side, and net worth. Okay. My part of the course is on the right side of the balance sheet, and it basically deals with the following question. Column. Where do we put the line between debt and equity in the liability side of the company? That's question number one of capital structure. How do companies decide to finance themselves? In other words, what is the borrowing policy of the firm? In practice, it means where do we put the line between debt and equity? Second important question that we're going to deal with is the following. Column. It's a dictate, basically. Column. Next slide. Once we have decided where to put the line, let's focus on the debt piece of the puzzle. There's debt, there's equity. Let's focus ourselves on debt. Mirror a little bit in the debt. and say, what kind of debt should a company have? That's another important financial decision that belongs to capital structure decisions. What do I mean with what kind of debt? Short term, long term, floating rate, fixed rate, local currency, foreign currency, plain vanilla, hybrid security. These are all questions that should be addressed by a financial manager concerning the so-called, we call it, like I say, the details. These are not exactly details, but the fine tuning of debt within the capital structure. I don't want to sell anything to you, but you have to trust me when I say that for a financial manager, which presumably some of you will become hopefully rather soon, it's basically what you're being paid for, deciding on these things. Basically, why do I say basically? Basically, because there is another important area that is under the supervision and the monitoring of the financial managers, which deals with the asset side of the balance sheet. Okay, it means with the investment valuation, the net present value, remember the internal rate of return, blah, blah, blah. And that's another area that provides support to the overall management of the firm. And the support is provided in this case by the CFO and his or her team. Okay? So these are, for the financial manager, rather important things that happens on a, I wouldn't say on a daily basis, but at least what we are allowed to say is that they happen on a recurring basis. Companies negotiate their debt financing, I would be tempted to say, on a daily basis, especially if they are rather relatively big. I'm not talking of the grocery store in your bâtiment, would say the French. I'm talking of companies that have a minimum dignity. Dignity is wrong, but minimum size, okay? And you deal with banks every day. Some companies deal with bondholders every day. You deal with the other shareholders every day. These are decisions that not only happen once in a while, but for financial managers are the bread and butter. Okay. There are other areas of concerning financial managers that happens more rarely, which are very interesting, by the way. I'm talking about mergers and acquisitions. Companies do not buy other companies every day. Actually, some companies never acquire other companies. Others do it, but once in a while, twice in a lifetime. Serial acquirers are very rare. But this is not the topic of our course. The topic of our course is dealing with daily decisions of financial managers. Okay? Now, the starting point is what follows. We are now entering into the first question I was addressing before, which is the ratio between debt and equity. Where to put the line. Okay? In order to appropriately examine this important finance topic, the starting point that is useful for examining the question is that company, as it's written in the slide, is assuming that the investment policy of the firm is given. The key word in this sentence is given. What do I mean with given? I mean that let's assume for some minutes, for a couple of hours, literally, let's assume at the beginning that companies have already made the investments that they wanted to do, okay, and they are, let me talk to the Italians first, hanno raggiunto la pace dei sensi. They are okay. They don't have any grillo that they want to go for an acquisition, for example, or whatever. They've already planned and they have the resources for financing the investments that they had in their mind. Okay? That's the assumption. Now, let's share a framework of analysis. I don't know how to call it, but let's share. When we talk about financial decisions, and I'm now entering something which is dramatic, I know, but you have to pay specific attention to what I'm saying here now. When there is a guy in the room, a guy or a lady that in the room that speaks or introduces finance topics, he or she has in his or her mind one key driver of all decisions. Column, whenever possible, comma, whenever possible, comma, all the decisions should be taken considering the market value of the assets and liabilities. Let me repeat, the market value of assets and liabilities, not the book value, the accounting value, but the market value. Okay, this is the radical distinction between a finance, I would say, professor and an accounting professor. I am an accountant, so I don't want to talk against myself. Okay, but accountants, they look at the past. Well, past, they deal with balance sheets, they deal with the income statement, cash flow statement, which is okay. It's perfect. And that's the end of the story. It's a very powerful story. It's a very indicative story of what the company has achieved so far, but it doesn't tell you about what the company is expected to achieve in the future. And that's where exactly the finance guy or lady enters into the field. Moving from a backward-looking approach, the accounting approach, to a forward-looking approach, the finance approach. As you may easily understand, it's a radical difference. It's a radical difference. And it's frustrating for finance guys. Finance guys are all frustrated. I am frustrated. Let me qualify this frustrated because you may think of something inappropriate. I am academically frustrated. What do I mean with that? The rest is okay, but academically frustrated. What do I mean with that? I mean that let me be a little bit philosophical now. If you are a finance guy, I say guy as generic, okay? So please forgive me if I don't every time decline. It's gonna be time wasting. If a guy is a finance guy, he deals with the future, right? He or she deals with the future. But dealing with the future means dealing with uncertainty. Dealing with uncertainty, it means that you may make mistakes. There is a very high probability that you could make a mistake because you don't compute, you make estimates. Accountants compute. Actually, the British friends would say they are bean counters, right? I am a bean counter. I'm officially a bean counter. I'm a registered, chartered financial account, Dottore Commercialista. I am an official bean counter. And that's a calculation you can do. 1 bean, 2 beans, 3 beans. Unless there's a problem with you, you don't make a mistake. Dealing with the future introduces uncertainty. Introducing uncertainty introduces the possibility of the high probability of making mistakes. And that also increases, if you have a little bit of ethics inside yourself, frustration. That's where the frustration comes from. But that's the bad side of the coin. The bright side of the coin is that dealing with the future brings you from the accounting values to the market values. Think about it. Because this is something that participants normally, they struggle to deal with. Say, okay, we understand, but in practice, what does it mean? Let me make you an example that comes from a different field. Well, actually, no, it's not a different field, but suppose you want to buy an apartment in the center of Turin, okay? And you need to set a value, the apartment, you need to have an idea what the value could be, right? Suppose that you go to the notary and he or she says, let me measure myself. Antonio, you want to buy this apartment in Corso Giulio Cesare? Think about it first. But second, according to, un esempio infelice, you come from Turin? Where exactly? Vicino Chivasso? Che è vicino Pinerolo? You're a lucky lady because this guy comes from Pinerolo and we have a problem with him. So, what was I saying? Okay, you go to the notary says, the apartment you are interested in was bought last year, suppose, by another guy or another lady, and the price which was paid, was 2 years ago, let's say 2 years ago for simplicity, was at that time 200,000 euros. Okay? Suppose that this is the number that he says. Do you think that this is the value of that apartment today? There's a very high probability that the price today could be different, higher or lower, right? Or because the price that 2 years ago was negotiated was the result of very peculiar negotiation between two parties with a different power of negotiation. But the price that the notary is telling you is the accounting value. It means the value that results from some official statements. But I hope that there is nobody in this room and at home that would even think that that's the starting point. Well, actually, the starting point is okay, but that's the ending point. 200,000 euros, that's a price, because I've seen it from the official statement. Who cares? Right? You could even not know that there was this transaction 2 years ago. It's because you were overzealous and you went to the notary asking him or her, do you have any idea if this apartment has been negotiated in the past? But you are not even required to do that. What you do is you set a price today, a market price today, by doing what? Suppose, for simplicity, that you want to buy this apartment today, not because you want to live it in, but because you want to rent it out to one student. And you want to use this apartment for future rentals to students or whoever. If that's the case, I hope, because it's in our DNA, I'm strongly convinced of that. I hope that you may easily understand that the price that you will set is basically driven by how much the price at which you can rent this apartment in the future. It's not the other way around. It's since I can rent this apartment at 1,500 per month for the rest of its life, ideally, okay, and I expect a certain fair remuneration. Okay, what I do is, sorry if I go back to corporate finance 101, I discount these future rentals that I expect to get at an appropriate discount rate that reflects the average remuneration of those who let the apartments on the market, 4%, 3%, 5%, depends on what is the average remuneration rate here in Turin. And what I get is a fair price. By discounting these rentals, I get a fair market price, which is based on what? On the future expectations. That's the beauty of finance. The frustration on one side, but the beauty on the other side. Why? Because it deals with actual decisions. Today decisions taken looking ahead rather than looking behind yourself. Okay? And this framework here reflects exactly what I've just mentioned. What I want to say is that you need to move your mind from the traditional accounting statement you are used to that separates and differentiates the assets from liabilities, the assets, current assets, long-term assets or non-current assets, short-term liabilities, long-term liabilities, and net worth. which is the accounting definition of these items, to a market definition or so. The market definition, I'm saying something not exactly correct, but so far it's okay if I use these definitions. The total assets that you are familiar with from your accounting studies in in the finance world, in other words, expressing the total assets in market values gives birth to what we normally call enterprise value. Enterprise value. Or sometimes firm value. Firm value. So in other words, if somebody somewhere asks you, what's the difference between total assets, enterprise value and market total assets, the first is expressed in market values, the latter in accounting values. Okay? Actually, you see the enterprise value is the EV that you see over there. Okay? Which is the market value of working capital and fixed assets. Working capital and fixed assets. The market value of working capital and fixed assets. But now, pay attention to what I'm telling you now. If a company has made investments historically in the working capital and its fixed assets means tangible assets, intangible assets, financial assets, and so on and so forth. These investments have presumably been made because they are expected to generate a certain return, right? This return is expressed in monetary terms in finance using cash flows, okay? Investments generate cash flows, okay? And these cash flows, which are reported there with the letter FCF, should be flexible on the terminology. You could see some books mentioning the same thing slightly differently. Be flexible on the terminology, otherwise you could get stuck to a specific acronym without understanding that it's a synonym of others. Okay. In any case, here we use free cash flow. The word free means that this beautiful word free means that those cash flows are free for being used the way you want. So they are already net of the compulsory things that you cannot skip. For example, investments, okay? In any case, those investments have been put in place in order to generate some cash flows in the future. In the future, you see the word future is recurring. In the future. And those future cash flows, since you have learned in Corporate Finance 101, in financial mathematics, business management, I don't know, you've seen it repeatedly during your background. Since these are future things, they must be discounted to the current value at an appropriate discount rate. And the appropriate discount rate is, in these slides, defined with the letter R, actually RA. You could also find K. In your book, actually, you find K. Be flexible on the terminology. RA stands for expected return on the assets of the firm. Letter R stands for return. Letter A, the symbol, is assets. Expected return on the assets. So, if that's the case, by discounting the future free cash flows at the return expected on those investments, the assets that you have put in place historically to generate those cash flows, you will obtain the enterprise value of the firm, the overall value of the firm, the value of the pie, the value of the pizza. Okay? Then, by subtracting, let's move ahead from the left to the right of this picture, by subtracting from the enterprise value the market value of net debt, you will get the value of equity. Please note that I didn't call it net worth. Net worth. Because net worth normally is the accounting definition of patrimonio netto. In other words, the accounting definition of the plug figure that you have in the balance sheet that plugs the balances. The balance sheet stands for balances, the assets and liabilities, right? The market definition of net worth is equity. Okay? Although you may argue, and if you say that you are not that wrong, then sometimes you can see in some balance sheets rather than net worth. Net worth is really UK based. But if you are in US, you could find also shareholders' equity. It's okay, be flexible on the terminology, okay? But generally, when the word equity standalone stands for the market value of the equity of the plug figure, okay? A couple of additional things. What's wrong? E mo me lo dici dopo 3 ore. Come condividere? Si è svegliato anche lui? Vuol dire che stanno dormendo tutti a casa, è pazzesco, bellissimo. Cioè, manco, sì, stavi condividendo. Quale slide? Sta roba di casa è terribile, sta distruggendo tutto. By the way, first of all, okay. A couple of additional remarks on, let's go back 1 second to RA. Okay, a couple of additional remarks. The expected return on the assets, this is very important for our course and in general for your financial preparation. The expected return on the assets is not set by the company. It's not set by the company. It is set by the market. Set is inappropriate, but it's not an internal decision of the firm. It reflects the expectations of the market. So it means that this is not something accounting based, it's something market based. Again, you see the difference between market and accounting. Okay, and as you may easily imagine, this is very purely financial, what I'm telling you now. The market sets these expected return on the investments in that specific company by looking at, by benchmarking, if you want, other similar companies with a similar risk profile out there. So by looking at other companies and their actual returns provided to their share/stakeholders, they say if similar companies out there have been able to provide this X% return to their shareholders and creditors, presumably, since the companies are very similar, they're absolutely comparable. If you want me to invest the money in your company, which is perfectly comparable to the other ones in terms of risk return profile, I would expect at least a similar remuneration that I would get elsewhere. Or if you prefer, I would expect the remuneration that I'm losing the opportunity of getting by investing in your company. That's why it is called opportunity cost of capital. Opportunity lost, cost of capital. And the final thing is that the RA reflects only the business risk, the risk of the business, not the financial risk. Okay? We'll see what I mean with business and what I mean with financial. Scusate. Well, now, let me see if I can move this a little bit somewhere else. Okay, let me show you a rather important finance principle. Who has taken a corporate finance 101 course in this room? Eh? Nessuno? Only you. Are you kidding? Let me rephrase. Who in the bachelor program has attended the corporate finance course? And not all of you, not necessarily all of you. Finanza aziendale, chi l'ha fatto? Oh, you have done it here in Turin with Professor Milletta, Battisti, sì, esatto. Ah, balli, ok. Ok. Ah, sì. Vabbè. Okay, by the way, but it seems from from the reaction that you had, it's another geological era, right? You have completely forgotten. You don't want to see, but actually, the nightmare is back again. I'm sorry, I must say. Sit back and relax. Fasten your seatbelt because the nightmare is here. Okay, the nightmare is about I don't know how to define this principle. This principle is like, I don't know, if you love literature, it could be the Dante's comedy. If you love music, it could be the Beethoven symphonies or the Vivaldi Four Seasons. It's the beauty, a principle I'm in love with. I don't know if I can share this love that I have with. I know that this sounds a little bit perverse to you. I know. And I'm aware of that. But the thing that I'm going to show you now that will bring us to something that you surely have heard somewhere, which is called the Modigliani-Miller theorem or propositions, is something that you need to have in your DNA. Why, Antonio? Because this is something that will help you in the... there is an old saying that says, there is nothing more pragmatic or practical than a good theory. The Modigliani-Miller theory, principles, call it as you want, is exactly one example of this important statement. So the blah blah, it's a blah blah that I continuously hear. Oh, Antonio, but this is too theoretical. You should be more pragmatic, practical. It's a totally stupid statement. I don't want to use any. I want to go straight to the point. It's a stupid statement. And we are not being recorded, right? So it's a stupid statement, okay? Because as I told you, you will learn by familiarizing again with the Modigliani, and I hope I can present it differently from what it has been presented to you, hopefully less boringly. That Modigliani-Miller theorem is something very practical, very practical. Actually, most of my annual income comes from these two guys. You're wondering, Antonio, how many times you teach these things in order to get the income? No, it's professional. I've been called many times, it's a lot, but various times by the courts, by litigating parties, statement that directly or indirectly brought me back to the question that was firstly addressed in 1958 by Franco Modigliani and Bertolt Miller. Because, for example, if in a court it is, I wouldn't say negotiated, I would say debatted, is debated. If in an impairment test or in evaluation, the tax shield of debt has been computed appropriately, it means going back to Modigliani and Miller. Something debated in a court. If a court says, as it happened to me, is a leveraged dividend, extraordinary dividend, reasonable, criminal or not, it brings you back to Modigliani and Miller, and it brings people into jail, as it happened, for a misappropriate interpretation of the Modigliani and Miller theorem. So imagine how practical this theorem is. And imagine how stupid people that simply say, oh, since there is the word Modigliani-Miller theorem, no, it's theoretical, stay away from. It's a principle. Put it in the garbage, the word theory. It's a principles. Principles probably is correct, okay? And let me show you the beauty of these principles is that you can explain them in a very simplistic is wrong, simplified way. Let's take a look at this example, which is taken from a book that is called Briley-Myers Allen. So it's not well, actually, you have it in your book, but the example is taken from, it's always the same story. Suppose that we have two firms okay, that generate the same stream of operating income. Oh, Antonio, these are unrealistic assumptions. I agree. I do agree, Antonio. But you just said that we don't. This is practical, but actually we're making an assumption which is realistic. Wrong. Wrong. Why? Because there could be two companies which are very similar. Then still only the stupid stuck to the word perfectly equal. Very similar. Okay? Very similar operating income. Coca-Cola and Pepsi. You want an example? Coca-Cola and Pepsi. And they differ only in their capital structure. Is it possible, Antonio? Coca-Cola and Pepsi, they do the same job, more or less. They get the same operating profit, more or less. Coca-Cola is slightly bigger than Pepsi. But they have a different capital structure. Is it possible? Yes, absolutely. One could be 100% equity financed. The other one could be 100% debt financed. This is totally independent from the business they're operating. Okay, so they have a different capital structure. Suppose that the firm U, which could be Coca-Cola, is unlevered. Unlevered means it is 100% equity financed. Unlevered, without leverage, without debt. Therefore, for this company, the total value of its equity, which we call EU, value of equity of an unlevered firm, equity of an unlevered firm, is the same as the total value of the firm. If the total value of the firm, which we call VU, value of an unlevered firm, the value of the assets, the enterprise value, is whatever it is, and the company on the other side is only financed with equity, the value of assets is the value of equity. Wow, man. Is this the Modigliani-Miller theory? Yes, exactly. Did they get the Nobel Prize for that? Yes. So we all have a chance of getting a Nobel Prize. If this is the statement with which they got the Nobel Prize, Francesco, you can work on this long career because you need to know the 4 basic arithmetic operations, plus, minus, to get the Nobel Prize, which is good news. Then there is firm L, which could be Pepsi, for example. That is levered. Levered means that it finances itself also with some debt. I'm screaming too much, probably. The value of the stock is therefore equal to the value of the firm. The value of the stock means the value of equity. To the value of the firm minus the value of net debt, so that we have the value of equity, right? That's what we saw before. So the equity value of a levered firm is going to be given by the overall value of the firm as levered, minus the debt of that specific company that we have now learned to define to qualify with the letter L, that stands for levered. Okay? Now the question is, would you invest in Pepsi or Coca-Cola? It's a practical question. This is a practical question. More practical than this, I cannot think of any other questions. Suppose that this slide is telling you, if you don't want to take a lot of risk, what would you be tempted to do? Let me invest in Coca-Cola, which at least it doesn't have any debt, so it sounds to me as less risky. Okay? So you will go for the unlevered firm U. U means the letter U. For example, suppose that you have a lot of money and you can buy 1% of Coca-Cola shares. Okay, your investment would be 1%. Your entitlement would be to 1% of the value of the assets. Okay, and then presumably it's improper. And then consequently, 1% of the profits. Right? So you are the owner of 1% of the value of the assets, which corresponds to the value of equity, by the way, because the company doesn't have any debt at all. And then simultaneously in the income statement, you are entitled to receive 1% of the profits. Let's assume for simplicity that so far there are no taxes. Okay? Alternatively, you could say, you know what, rather than I don't like Coca-Cola. I love Pepsi. I want to invest in Pepsi. Which could be an alternative. There could be an alternative strategy. You could say, I know that Pepsi is also debt financed. Let's suppose, for simplicity, this is a simplification. the assumption can be relaxed and the conclusions will still hold. Suppose it's 50% debt, 50% equity, okay? Which, by the way, is what normally happens in practice on average, okay? And then you decide to split your investment to get a little bit, the same percentage of debt and equity. I subscribe some bonds and I subscribe some shares. 1% of bonds and 1% of shares, that corresponds in terms of value to 1% of equity in the unlevered firm, right? Because now it's split in two. 0.5% makes, 1% of something that is 50% of the original value brings you exactly to the same value, to the same result. In this example, your investment will entitle you to receive 1% to subscribe and to have the property of 1% of the debt of the levered firm and 1% of the equity of the levered firm. Okay? Overall, you will have 1% of DL plus EL. Bravo. Exactly. Okay? Which in turn is 1% of the overall firm. Because if you have debt and equity that corresponds to the value of the firm, and you have 1% here and 1% here, you have 1% of everything. Okay? What happens in terms of profits? It happens that if you have invested 1% in bonds, suppose, and 1% in equity, assuming that there are no taxes, what is your expected return? You receive 1% of the interest rate on the bonds that you have subscribed and 1% of the profits on the shares you have bought. But in turn, the profits that you will receive from the shares will be the profits net of the interest expenses that the company has paid to its creditors. Now, if you do 1% interest plus 1% of profits minus interest, what you will be left with, arithmetically, is 1% of profits, right? I don't know what your opinion is, but this 1% of profits over there is exactly equivalent to 1% over there. Okay? And this is disturbing. This is disturbing. Yeah. Why is it disturbing? Because it's telling you that no matter what you decide to do, you get the same result. It's totally unexpected. And that's the bad side of the coin. There is a positive side of the coin. That is the discipline that Modigliani and Miller have taught to all of us, which is that your profit, what you get as a return, it's not driven by the way the company is actually financed. It's driven by how good the company is in doing what it is expected to do in its daily business. In other words, what gives birth to the profits of the firm. The value of something is finally driven by the quality of the assets, how good you are in your business, not the way you split those values into pieces, in this case 2 pieces, debt and equity. Actually, when they got the Nobel Prize, and the journalists couldn't understand what this theorem, this is what I just told you is called principle number 1 of Modigliani-Miller theory. And the principle number 1 says, I think it's written also somewhere, eccolo qua. Proposition 1, the market value of any firm is independent of its capital structure. That's exactly what I'm telling you now. So it's reported also here. But let's go back here. I don't want to be stuck on the slides, if you agree with that. What was I saying? Okay, the fact that according to Modigliani and Miller, actually the story goes, it's a true story. The story goes that when they got the Nobel Prize, you received the Nobel Prize. Actually, Franco Modigliani got the Nobel Prize, not Merton Miller, Franco Modigliani. The only Italian Nobel Prize in economics, corretto? I would say. Well, actually, Italian is improper because at that time he was an American citizen because he went away from Italy in 1938 following the racial laws that we issued, we issued in 1938. He was forced, being a Jew, to leave Rome, where he used to live, and he flew away to Boston. And then he took the American citizenship, and he got the Nobel Prize when he was American. But I must also say that he's always followed his country, has always been here. I mean, that's the good news. But the bad news is that officially he was not an Italian, he was an American citizen. But in any case, Franco Modigliani was a very brilliant person. And when the journalist asked him, "Dear Mr. Modigliani, could you please explain to our poor, humble guys here what you mean with the principle number one?" He said, one sentence, he said, "It doesn't matter in how many pieces you cut a pizza, you still will eat, the maximum you can eat is one pizza. It's not that you fool yourself by saying, if I cut it in two slices, I'm eating less than cutting it in 8 slices. It's amazing. It's true. It is true. You fool yourself if you say, no, I cut it in 8 slices, so I have the impression of, you may have the impression of eating more because it takes longer, presumably, but you're still eating the same amount of pizza. And the value of what you are eating, the amount, how much you're stuffing in your belly, it depends on the size of the pizza, not in how many pieces you cut it into. This is the principle number one of Modigliani Miller. It says that no matter if you are financed with debt, equity, a lot of debt, a lot of equity, whatever you decide to do, it's irrelevant. It's irrelevant. It doesn't change the overall happiness of your stakeholders, because the overall happiness of your stakeholders is driven by how good you are in the asset side of your firm, how good you are in selecting the appropriate profitable investments rather than wasting your money. Okay? That's principle number one. And you say, Antonio, why is it a practical one? Because there are a lot of consequences on that. Probably the first and the most important one is that you can sue companies that try and get as much as possible the profits from their financial activity rather than their operational activity. There are a lot of trials in courts, especially in northeast of Italy, that are for which shareholders are suing the managers. I'm not kidding, this is true. Suing the managers because they lost a lot of time in dealing with the financing, capital structure, finance, complicated things, while they lost their daily business. They were distracted from their daily business. Your daily business is producing shoes, produce the shoes, because that's where you get the money from. It's not from the way you combine the financing tools that you can extract at this order, the way you manage the interest rate risk of the currency. That's ancillary. That's secondary. What drives the overall value of the firm, and that comes back from 1958 Franco Modigliani theorem. You need to be good. You need to focus your expertise, your competencies in your daily businesses. It makes me laugh. It remains between us. Strategic people, strategic colleagues, they say, oh, you know what, there have been recently some strategic studies on, I wouldn't say Porter, but others that, Rumelt and so on and so forth, that they've decided, companies should not diversify away their risk. They should exploit their core competencies, your competitive skills, distinctive skills that you have, and focus on that rather than getting distracted. This comes basically at the end of the 80s. Bravo, huh? Where's the revolution? This is something that 1958, 30 years ago, Mr. Modigliani already said. 30 years ago. You're late 30 years, a third of a century. Okay? Because it was implicit behind the thought of this principle that if I say that the value of the firm is independent if I say that the size of the pizza is independent of how many slices you cut it into, it means that what you need to focus your attention on is to increase the size of the pizza. Develop your core competencies. That was proposition number one. Let's have a break because there is proposition number two after the break. So, my dear friends, how many minutes you want for your coffee break? Well, I would say if you agree with that, maximum 50 minutes. Is that okay for you? Enjoy the coffee break.
take?
Aspetta un attimo. Arrivi. Tiro solo. No, 12, 13.
12, 13 e poi fino alle 18.
14, 18. Vai. Dico, ready?
Guys, I have a good news regarding the retake exam of the next week. Will be only on the part of advanced corporate finance and not banking, okay? The banking part will be probably on the first week of February, okay? It's a good news. Ma no, prof, perché qua solitamente stampano le slide per gli studenti. È una domanda lecita, è una domanda lecita. Esatto.
È personale. Stop harassing Nicolò Nirino. No, ma questa io devo dire più spesso, ma mi diverto troppo. Ok. Ma dove è andato Nicolò? No. Real time from. No, no. Vabbè, andiamo avanti. So I already, let's go ahead before the lunch break. Well, actually, classes are sort of interval between two breaks in our case, right? So we need to resist till 1 hour, basically, okay? Then we're gonna have lunch break, then another pause with a class, and then a real coffee break in the afternoon. No, actually, we agreed to have a long, okay. This is de facto something that we already commented before. Do you have questions concerning what we've seen so far, or I can go ahead? I hope I can go ahead. Just a quick additional remark on what I said before the coffee break. You remember that I told you that according to Modigliani-Miller's theorem, it doesn't matter how you finance your firm because you cannot change the value of the company as a whole. Okay, you're simply changing the way you distribute, the pieces, the size of the slices that you're cutting the pizza into, but actually not changing the overall size of the pizza. Okay, this is, by the way, a little bit frustrating for a financial manager if you think about it, right? Because it means that there is no need for a company to pay a CFO. Because if it decides that the company should be financed 100% debt or 100% equity, it will not change the fate of the company. We'll see, needless to say, that this disruptive conclusion of the Modigliani-Miller proposition number one actually holds if certain conditions hold. Alternatively, there could be room for suggesting the idea that actually capital structure is everything but irrelevant. In any case, what I want to say as a corollary to what I mentioned before, the principle number one of Modigliani-Miller, is that we can further elaborate on the consequences of that principle, as this slide says. Well, let me summarize what's written here. Is that simply, if we are in the liability side of the balance sheet, and we just said that it's not important where you put the line between debt and equity. That's what Modigliani-Miller used to say. There are also other consequences of this. It's not important where you put the line. It's the consequences are referred to the fact that it is not important if you put more than one line in the liabilities. More than one line, for example, it could mean debt, preferred shares, and shares. So you have two lines. It is not important. Still, it means that rather than cutting the pizza into two slices, you're not cutting it into three slices. You don't care. The size of the pizza remains unchanged. Or if you, it doesn't matter what you consider as debt for your company, short term, long term, it's totally irrelevant. Still, because proposition number one will continue holding. Okay? Now, let's take a look at this example here, which is rather interesting. The so-called EPS fallacy that will bring us, this is important, this example will bring us from Modigliani-Miller proposition 1 to Modigliani-Miller proposition 2. Rather than presenting you directly the proposition 2, I believe that it could be useful to use an example in order to show you how to go progressively toward Modigliani Miller number 2. Suppose that Otello is a company and it's actually reviewing its capital structure, okay? The following table shows its current position, the way the company is actually. The company so far, this is important, has no leverage. It means it is 100% equity financed. Do you have any news concerning the slides? Yes. Bravo. Well done. Okay. It's on your shoulders, by the way. The company has no leverage, and all the operating profit is paid as dividends, so they do not retain any profit within the firm. They decide to distribute all the profits in terms of as dividends. Let's also assume that the expected earnings and dividends per share, they are the same. Earnings and dividends in the company, since the company distributes all the earnings and dividends are the same. You earn 100, you distribute 100, earnings are equal to dividends. But this figure is by no means certain, so they expect to have dividends per share of $1.5 per share, but it's an expectation. They are not certain about what could happen in the future. And they depict alternative scenarios that they believe would be reasonable as well. Let's take a look directly at the slide. Suppose that this company has 1,000. Am I sharing the screen with your colleagues at home? Okay. Suppose that you have this company has a number of shares of 1,000 shares outstanding. It means in circulation. The price per share, single share, is $10 each. So the market value of shares is going to be 1,000 shares whose value is $10 each. 1,000 multiplied by 10 is $10,000. Okay? And that's one story. Suppose the expectations for the company for the future could be one column is in bold character because it's the most likely scenario, but the company believes that the operating profit in the future could range between $500 and $2,000. Okay? The most likely scenario, according to Otello, is 1,500, but they don't exclude that under certain circumstances, the actual operating profit could range again between $500 and $2,000. Since the company has 1,000 shares outstanding, in the 4 alternative scenario that you see here, the company should have, the earnings per share would be $0.5 per share in the worst scenario. How do we get this 0.5, Antonio? 500 are total earnings. Where is it? 500 total earnings divided by 1,000 shares outstanding. What you get is 0.5. In the second scenario, the earnings per share is going to be $1, and we obtain it by dividing $1,000 operating profit divided by 1,000 shares. In the third scenario, we have an operating profit of 1,500 that we divide in turn by 1,000, and what we get is that the earnings per share will be 1.5. And finally, something similar happens also for the most optimistic scenario. Okay, needless to say, the line earnings per share that you see mentioned here is equivalent to dividends per share, since the company distributes all the earnings, it's an assumption, distribute all the earnings in terms of dividends. What would the return on shares be in the 4 alternative scenarios? Let's start from the most pessimistic one, which means the first one. Here, 5% in the worst scenario. How do we get this 5%? By dividing 0.5 earnings per share $0.5 divided by the price per dollar, price per share, dollar price per share. Okay, 0.5 divided by 10 gives you 5%. Second scenario, $1 numerical currency return. In relative terms, which means dividing this absolute number by the actual price of the shares, $10, we will get 10%. And so on. For the consensus scenario, the one written in bold, the third column that I don't know, I'm not sure you can get the fact that this one, don't see it, but here this is bold. It's expected outcome, the most likely outcome, so-called the consensus. It's going to be 15%. 15% that in turn is the ratio between 1.5 divided by 10, 15%. Okay? So the most, and then we have 20%, but now we know the story. I don't have to repeat each time. 50% is the expected outcome. So shareholders under this most likely scenario expect to get, given the assumption of the exercise or the simulation, a 50% return. Okay? That's the status quo. The company as is now. Now, suppose that the firm CEO has come to the conclusion that shareholders would be better off if the company, rather than being 100% equity finance as it is now, it decides to go on equal proportions of debt and equity, 50% equity. He therefore proposes to issue $5,000 of debt at an interest rate, it's an assumption, of 10% and use the proceeds of this issuance to buy back, to repurchase 500 shares whose single value is $10. 500 shares multiplied by $10 value each means $5,000. I use the money coming from the borrowings for repurchasing some shares. So the final result will be that my capital structure will be represented by $5,000 outstanding debt plus $5,000 remaining shares. Okay? Which is exactly what is reported in the top side of this table. Please note that the price per share does not change. Why? Because the number of shares will be decreased to 500 due to the fact that other 500 have been bought back and cancelled. Okay? And again, if we have the market value shares, which is $5,000, and we divide now by 500 shares, still will remain with $10 share price. Okay? Final remark before moving into the alternative scenario. If we have raised $5,000 debt and we pay a 10% interest rate, the interest rate will be $500 per year. Now, let's see what happens to the previous scenario with now this alternative potential capital structure that Mr. CEO, Mrs. CEO is suggesting to Otello. What happens is that the operating profit does not change. Take a look, 500, 1,000, 1,500, 2,000, the same line that is reported here. And now we need to introduce the interest expenses. The interest expenses subtracts profits so that the equity earnings will be lower due to the fact that the creditors will be remunerated first. And what we get is that we need to add a line that has the same figure in all the alternative scenario, 500, okay? That will in turn lead us to the equity earnings, net profit, if you want. Net profit is going to be given by, in the worst scenario, 500 profit minus 500 interest expenses means zero, assuming there are no taxes. Second scenario, 1,000 profit. The interest rate doesn't change. interest expenses do not change, so it's still 500. The net profit will be 500. Third scenario, 1,500 minus 500 will give you a net profit of 1,000. Fourth scenario, 1,500. What will the earnings per share be? Well, we now know the story. 0 in the first scenario. In the second scenario, 500 total earnings divided by 500 shares outstanding means $1 each. Second scenario, 1,000 earnings that must be divided over 500 shares, it means $2 each. The third scenario, $3. Okay? Can you follow me? Sure? Very simple calculations. Okay? In relative terms, we see that this 0 remains 0. 1 divided by the price per share, which is 10 euros. 1 divided by 10 is 10%. Second scenario, actually third scenario, we have 2 divided by 10 gives us 20%. Fourth and final scenario, 3 divided by 10 will give us 30%. Okay? And that's the end of the example. That we have almost reached the final destination, which is M&M proposition number 2. Please note that if we compare the final line, the bottom line of this with the bottom line of the previous thing, observe that the bottom line of the second table, the latter, this one, as the CFO, Mr. Otello says, it will put the shareholder in a better position because the numbers are higher. The return is higher. Shareholders will have a bigger smile. Okay? Your slides also represent this on a graph. This is simply the representation of what we have just seen with numbers on a graph. Horizontal axis, operating profit. Vertical axis, earnings per share. And you see that the red line is the company as is. The blue or green or whatever it is line is the company as it could be. And Mr. Otello observes that if the expected operating profit is higher than 1,000, the shareholders will be better off if they decide to have also some debt in the capital structure. If the operating profit, the expected, or if you prefer, future operating profit, is going to be lower than 1,000, it will be the other way around. It is better to have the the company being all equity financed. So since Mr. Otello is quite optimistic about this company, he decides that it is better to go for this alternative that will give a higher earning per share vis-a-vis the current one. A higher than this line means equal proportions of debt and equity. Okay? That's what I told you written narratively. Now, if that's the conclusion and the CFO of Otello reaches, let me repeat, it is better to have some debt in the capital structure because shareholders will be better off. If this is the conclusion, you may be simply wondering, why the hell we don't observe companies out there always having some debt in their capital structure? If shareholders would be better off, you would expect 100% of companies out there to be at least partially debt financed. If I'm better off, se sto meglio, I would go for the solution that makes me happier. And the solution that makes me happier is this green line here. Okay? How is it possible that we observe, let me say, a counter argument? How is it possible that we observe that there are some companies out there that have zero debt at all? Are they behaving irrationally according If we follow this structure, it seems that they're behaving irrationally. So, where is it? You've been appointed as financial advisor of Otello. So you're not the CFO, you're not Mr. Otello, you are an external advisor. Okay? And you could argue what follows. Let me read it. Mr. Otello, the conclusion that you were mentioning before ignores the fact that Otello's shareholders have the alternative of borrowing on their own account. You don't have to do it necessarily as a company, because individual shareholders could borrow money by themselves without having you to do it, and replicating exactly the same position without the company being financed. And if they reach the same result, it means that it is totally irrelevant what you are doing. It doesn't create any value. Suppose that one investor borrows $10 and then he invests $20 in two unlevered shares. It means in two shares of your company as you are now. I borrow 10, I invest my 10, I add my $10, I invest $20 and buy two shares, unlevered shares. He has to put up only $10 of his own money, right? $10 is given me by banks. $10 I have it in my pockets. 10 plus 10, $20 I invest it. Okay? The payoff on this investment varies with Otello's operating profit. That's obvious. It depends on which scenario is gonna actually occur. But if you take a look at the table which is reported below, that reports the result of the investment of this investor that acts individually, he or she acts individually, you will immediately observe, take a look at the bottom line, that the result that he or she would get is exactly the same of the one that we have obtained, assuming that the company borrows more, not the shareholders, the company. Okay? 0, 10, 20, 30 if the company borrows money. 0, 10, 20, 30 if the shareholder borrows money. Okay? Exactly the same result. But, and this is, again, proposition number one, right? You may argue, Tan, as you were correctly suggesting before, Tan, right? That if that's the case, it doesn't matter if the company borrows money because shareholders can do it by themselves more easily, more rapidly. Why should the company borrow money? Let's leave shareholders borrow money. But that's proposition number one. But I promised you that we would have gone towards proposition number two, right? And here it comes. Pay attention to one. No, please notice one important thing from the two tables that I was showing you. That's the original table, okay? I hope you have noticed that the expected, the most likely return for the shareholders of Otello, if the company remains as it is 15%. Alternatively, if the company decides to go for borrowing some money, his or her expected return is going to be 20%. Okay? So it means it would be higher, 5% more. Okay? We're going toward proposition number two because it is true that in the alternative scenario, there's something weird here. There's something wrong, you may even say, in this example. There's something disturbing. What is this something? Is that how is it possible that if we go for the alternative scenario, me as a shareholder, I will make a bigger smile. I will have my wallet bigger, 5% bigger, okay? And the share price remains the same. Turns out to be a little bit disturbing, because you would be tempted to say that if the expected remuneration of shareholders is going to be higher, the stock price should be higher because that company is particularly precious, right? It's giving you a better remuneration and its shares will be more valuable, right? But actually, the price per share in the two alternative scenarios here remains unchanged. $10, $10. Even if the return on the shares is going to increase from 15% to 20%. That's the weird thing. And that's where proposition number 2 of Modiani Miller, the poetry of finance, the poetry, the Picasso of finance is proposition number 2, if you like Picasso. Me personally, I don't like it that much, but it's a classical that to be mentioned, so. Shall we go step by step or directly to the final? Let's go step by step, okay? Because these things must be seen once in your life, impress, I hope, yourself. Once in your life, they remain imprinted in yourself, hopefully. So you need to see them. Think about it. I told you at the beginning of our meeting that the expected return for all the company is, we named it RA, you remember, the return on the assets, which is given by what? By the operating profit of the firm, or also net of taxes. This assumption can be relaxed. Divided by what? By the market value of all the, it's called financial securities, it means all debt and equity, right? The way you are financed, market value should be the same. Suppose, let's go straight to the third bullet point over there. Suppose that an investor, it may happen, why not, holds all of a company's debt and all of its equity. For example, a private equity investor that subscribes all the debt and provides all the equity financing. This private equity investor is then entitled, by definition, I would say, to all the firm's operating profit. Whatever you generate, it belongs to me. Why? Because I own 100% of debt and 100% of equity. Okay? And so my remuneration as a private equity investor will be given by what? By RA, return on the assets. What you get from your daily activity, it goes entirely into my pocket. Wearing the glasses of a creditor or wearing the glasses of a shareholder. Because I'm both. I'm a Prometheus. But since the portfolio in which I have invested is a little bit debt and a little bit equity, okay, and I assume that I earn something in terms of creditor, RD, the return on debt, which means the return that I expect being a creditor, and the return that I expect being as shareholder as well, return on equity, okay, these two things together must equal RA, because that's the maximum that you can offer. This is what you generate, RA, right? It's the size of the pie. But this size of the pie is going to be split into two slices. A first slice that has this amount, this magnitude, and a second slice that has this magnitude. And these two slices, their corresponding expected returns, must be equal to the overall size of the pie. By definition, I hold everything. I'm sitting at the table because I'm gonna eat the two slices. You're gonna cut the pizza into two slices. I will be eating both slices. Once without the jacket as a credit. Then I pick up, put the jacket on. Oh, now I am a shareholder. What's remaining here? The rest of the pizza. Okay, and I eat everything. It means that I'm eating the entire pizza. I'm eating what you can put on the table. What can you put on the table? RA. As a creditor, I eat the slice, D over D plus E, that size of the slice, okay, with my appetite as a creditor, RD. Then I change my clothes, I resit at the table, and I remain with the slice, the remaining slice of the pizza, which is E over D plus E, okay? And I sit with the appetite of a shareholder. But my appetites as a creditor and shareholder cannot be higher than what you can put on the table. In other words, no matter if I want to receive more, that's what you can put on the table. All right, right? Ta-da! À moi les yeux. Now, if you reshuffle, for the Italians, if you compute the formula inversa by solving this very sophisticated equation by RE, you solve it by RE, RA is equal percentage plus multiplied by RE plus percentage multiplied by RD. But now you solve it by RE, what you get, try if you want at home, is this. That RE is equal to RA plus RA minus RD multiplied by D over E. your face is saying, chi se ne frega, right? The Romans would say, sti cazzi. Sempre non registrati, diciamo, giusto? Okay. Oh, but that's a Roman expression. That's not an insult. This equation here is the Modigliani-Miller proposition number 2. You see, Antonio, we insist. E chi se ne frega, right? I mean, we are insisting. And that's a mistake. If you say that, that's a serious mistake. If you are a little bit interested in finance, that's obvious. If you don't care at all, stay with your proposition, okay? But if you are here because you want to presumably learn something from these incredibly magical words, a word of finance, this is where you should stay. Proposition number 2 is something that I love because there is nothing more pragmatic than proposition number 2 in finance, or Modigliani-Miller. Okay, having said that, what the hell is this proposition telling us? This proposition is telling us that the expected remuneration of shareholders, read it as the happiness of shareholders, is given by how good you are, my dear company, in doing your business, and I see it in RA, plus, let me repeat, plus something else. And this something else is given by the way you manage your capital structure. What's wrong, Max? What's wrong? Is disturbing you? It's okay? It's okay? Okay. So what I was saying is, how good you are in your business plus something. This plus something means the parentheses that you see over there, RA minus RE multiplied by D over E. The second part of this equation, the second part means RA minus RE multiplied by D over E. It's called leverage effect. Leverage effect. It tells you that if you earn more on your daily activities as measured by RA vis-a-vis your cost or expected remuneration of debt, RD, it is more convenient for you to increase your leverage ratio, D over E, because you will make your shareholders happier. Let me go here. I have a shot, guys, but yeah, should have. If the part, let me go straight to the point, man. I know that the guys at home, they're not listening, so let me see if this way works a little bit better. I'm sorry for the shoulders. If the parenthesis is positive over there, it means that the company, siamo 80 anni 70. If the parenthesis, if the company is earning more than what it owes to its creditors. Arithmetically, if you look at it, if the parenthesis is positive and your objective is to maximize RE, you need to increase D over E. It's more convenient for you to increase D over E, the debt equity ratio. Okay? It's arithmetic. There's nothing that complex that needs to be understood. It's very simple, but it's absolutely full of consequences, what I've just said. First of all, let's apply this equation to explain the puzzle that we have. Don't forget, we had a puzzle, we had a conundrum that wasn't solved, which is this one. How is it possible that no matter what the company does, the share price remains unchanged, even if shareholders will be better off by using some leverage, right? This is a puzzle. It's an unsolved question. If we apply the formula here, it will let you explain how to go from 15% to 20%. You don't trust me? Let me show you. In our example, RA is 15%. The base scenario, right? You're already lost. It's here. The base scenario, RA, 15%. The company is totally equity financed. What is equity for the expected return on equity is equal to the expected return on assets, because the company only has equity, doesn't have any debt, right? So the starting point, this RA over there, is 15%. In our example, we have also assumed that RD is equal to 10%. You remember that? So in the bracket, in the parentheses, you have RA 15% minus RD, which is 10%. The difference is 5%. That must be now multiplied by D over E. But in our example, we assume that we have $5,000 debt, $5,000 equity, which means that D over E is 1. 15% plus 5% multiplied by 1 is 20%. It's a symphony to me. I know that you are not impressed that much, but this also tells you another disruptive thing, because we still have not answered to the key question here, even philosophically. How is it possible? Now we understood the mechanics. Okay, by applying this formula, we move from 15% to 20%. That's great, okay? But still, there is a puzzle which is unsolved. And the puzzle is, how the hell is it possible that by increasing the happiness of shareholders, the share price remains the same? And the answer is, it's the most puzzling thing that I must tell you, so I want to sell it. Because the rest is going to be boring. Well, it's already boring, you're saying, but it's even more boring. The answer is because the company, in the alternative scenario, the 20% scenario, is riskier. Let me repeat. Because the company, in the alternative scenario that brings us to the 20% return, is riskier. Antonio. Yes. Why is it riskier? Because the company in the alternative scenario has some debt in its capital structure. It has 50% debt in the capital structure, which means that compared to a company that used to be 100% equity financed, now the company is riskier. By definition, I would say, right? The company has some debt. Something may go wrong with creditors. And since shareholders need to factor in their expected remuneration, the fact that the company can now become riskier, they expect a higher return. higher risk, higher return. And the amazing thing that Franco Modigliani and Merton Miller, who both passed away, by the way, have taught us is how to measure this link between higher risk and higher return. Higher risk, okay. How much higher should be my expected return? The answer to this question is M&M proposition number 2. And if you are still skeptical about these amazing results, please consider that, just to go straight to the point. I hope you remember from your Corporate Finance 101 course that Mr. Baldi, Professor Villeta, or if you were in Turin, or other colleagues if you were elsewhere, they surely have broken your balls on the CAPM, right? The capital asset pricing model. I cannot believe that you have never heard this acronym. Come on, all right? The cost of equity is the risk-free rate plus the beta multiplied by the market risk premium. Remember that? That's another version of the Modigliani-Miller proposition too. This proposition, if you want, let me jump a little bit, is expressed in terms of returns. The CAPM expresses exactly the same principle in terms of risk. So there are two sides of the same coin. The CAPM is the risk side of the return side expressed in 1958 by Modigliani and Miller. And in fact, needless to say, the CAPM was originally formulated later than the Modigliani-Miller model in 1963, 5 years later. Okay? That's, I need to find something to convince you that this is an amazing result, because it's very practical, because you can measure the things. When you apply the CAPM, you estimate the cost of equity. You de facto are going back to this principle here. You want me to convince you even more with another possible argument? The entire private equity business, private equity and venture capital business is based on this formula. Because the incredibly high average expected return of private equity investors are based on the second part of this formula. They select good potential targets, RA. But they also select good potential targets and they have a rather high residual borrowing capacity. They leverage themselves in order to finance the acquisition. It means that they leave the target firm after the acquisition substantially levered. But it means that the debt equity ratio there is going to turn out to be much higher than it used to be. But if the difference between RA and RD is high, that will lead them to a better position. Is a question we tell you. If the company I'm selecting as a private equity investor is a good one that gets an RA of 15%, but I can finance this acquisition as a private equity investor with the cost of debt of 5%. It means the difference in the parentheses is going to be 15% minus 5%, which is 10%. Wow. I may be extremely cynical, and that's exactly what they are, but if this difference is 10%, I want to exploit it as much as I can, which means I want to increase the debt equity ratio as much as I can. Imagine if I have a debt equity ratio which is only 2, normally it's 7 to 8 in some cases. Suppose only 2 debt equity ratio multiplied by 10%, parenthesis, means 20%, plus 15% of the RA means 35%. I would say it's a rather interesting investment, isn't it? Considering that today you invest at 2-3% if you're good, 35 by simply exploiting this cash machine of the leverage effect. It's something amazing. the only message, ethical one, I want to leave you with concerning this Modigliani-Miller proposition number 2 is that there is no free lunch, right? And we have learned in economics and in our daily life that there is no free lunch. And what is the price? What kind of price are we actually paying here? One is philosophical, let's say philosophical. The other one is technical. The philosophical one is that, okay, but the company that has a debt equity ratio of 2 is a very risky one. And if it is a very risky one, you do expect a higher return. But it's a higher return, not that is not the result of a bit of magic. It's a higher return that results from a riskier firm. First. And the second important thing, which is a technical issue, is that we are actually assuming that in this formula, that if we increase the debt equity ratio, the figures in the parentheses remain unchanged, which is a strong assumption. Because you may argue that if the more a company borrows money, in other words, the more the debt equity ratio increases, the more the company becomes riskier, the higher is going to be progressively the RD. And if it is RD increases as well, the difference between RA and RD shrinks, okay? And in some cases, it can even go down to 0 or become negative. Okay. Can you follow me? Do you have any questions? You are impressed, right? Not by my presentation, by the proposition number 2. And you should be impressed. It's so difficult to impress students these days. But I don't have other arguments. This is the most powerful one that I have. If I wasn't able to convince you that this is an impressive result, it's going to be hard for me for the rest of the other 20 hours. Okay? Antonio, still me. Do you have any... Oh, by the way, this is exactly what... I told you, I use the slides, but from time to time, because I prefer speaking. If you prefer me to present the slides, it's okay. I could even save some efforts. But I believe that it's more useful and more productive that I tell you the things. But by the way, what you see here is what I explained to you. I'm not cheating. It's reported in the slides. If we want to represent graphically the MNM2, that stands for Modigliani-Miller number 2, ciao. If we want to represent col cellulare, si sa mai. If you want to represent graphically what we have just said and reported in the tables, very useful because it's immediate, the representation provided, a very useful thing to do is to report our comments on a graph. And the graph should be built as follows. On the horizontal axis, we put the debt equity ratio. Here, the debt equity ratio. On the vertical axis, we put the 3 things we have been commenting so far. RE, RA, RD. Okay? And we start describing. Imagine that this graph, now we have to build the graph. You already have the final result, but suppose that we have to build this graph. Sì, adesso faccio proprio il cantante, dai, fino in fondo. Voilà. Strangers in the night. È terribile. No. The more we move from the don't take any picture, because I am ashamed of what I'm doing. The more we move from the left to the right, the higher is going to be the debt equity ratio. Okay? Where do we start? This final graph here is the result of a progressive description of the 3 lines, right? Which is the starting point, Antonio, for building this graph? Let me switch this question to you. I cannot answer. I don't know Antonio's been. You know which is the answer? Stefano da casa vuole rispondere?
Yeah. Francesca. Adesso. No, adesso. Sì.
Is it possible to have the answer to the following question, dear Francesca? And you were lucky, okay? Suppose that you don't see the graph. You only see the axis, okay? R-E, You need to end up having this graph, but you don't see it. From which line would you start? RD, RA, or RE? No capito.
RA, the expected return on assets. I think.
Vabbè, cominciamo da RA. You agree with her? Aspetta, io voglio divertire un po' anch'io, che cavolo. Do you think if we bring a portable mic? It's okay. It's okay. Problem is why? Why? Jesus. Position number one says that no matter what the energy you have, so for initial lacking, that's not very difficult. Position number one, change. What are the assets? It's a function of the delay. Control this horizontal line here. Second line that we draw is questa mi sembra già RD. Exactly. We put RD because RD is given, right? It's given by what? By the expectations of banks. It's the interest rate that banks apply us, and they are priority claimants. Uno l'abbiamo perso, lui è andato in bagno, finirà male oggi alle 4 secondo me, chiamiamo la Croce Rossa. So RD is number 2, okay? I have a question for Francesca. Francesca, rassegnati. I have a question for Francesca. Why the hell? Why the hell we have this behavior of RD? In other words, I don't know what your opinion is, but I would have expected an horizontal line for RD as well. Let me see if I wrote it. Just go ahead, I will follow you. Breaking the keyboard. Sorry? Francesca, ma che stai facendo? Una fatica? Let me put it differently. It's not a question. I don't want to harass you. Okay, there's something wrong between me and you. No, wrong. Wrong. No. I want to tell you this because why suddenly this horizontal line here starts increasing? And what is the reason behind it? Exactly. Bravo. What is your name? Alex. In the last name? Gioca. Avete dei cognomi meravigliosi, ragazzi. Questo è Salvi, gioca, adesso, è tutto positivo qua. Bene, bene così. Beh, poi c'è Nerino, Nerino già butta tutto giù. Martelli, sono i docenti che rovinano tutto, sempre detto. Allora, the more a company borrows money, the riskier is for creditors. I mean, if you are a bank and you are lending money, let me put it this way: you're lending €1. But let me put it on myself. If I knock on the door of a bank and I say I need a loan of €1, I'm risk free for the bank because the bank expects that €1 I will be able to repay it. But if I knock on the door of a bank and I say I need €10 million, in my case, there's a very high probability that the repayment will not necessarily occur at the due time. Okay, which means that I'm perceived, I'm being felt by the bank as a risky creditor, or a sort of debtor, and the bank is a creditor. Okay, and thus, in exchange for that, the interest rate will be higher because I'm riskier. Okay. Final step, RE, return for equity holders. This line here, let's call it line. This line here is the result of this equation that has an intercept here where RE is equal to RA. It means that we have this intercept where the debt equity ratio is equal to 0. If debt equity ratio is equal to 0, RE is equal to RA, right? And in fact, that's exactly what happens here. Here, at this point. The more we move on the right, the higher the debt equity ratio, and the higher we can exploit the leverage effect. Okay? But then, needless to say, if also the RD increases, this will taper off, will progressively burn out some of the earnings of the equity holders because you need to, this is the size of the pie. If this slice increases, your slice decreases. The beauty of this proposition is that it makes perfect sense. You don't need to be a wizard to understand it. But the good news is that the Modigliani and Miller were able to qualify and quantify that, which means in turn that this can be useful for practical decisions. I say the final thing, and then we're gonna go for the lunch break. Oh, where is it? Just 1 second. Okay, let me see. The same graph I've just shown you is the graph of Modigliani Miller, 1958. However, in practice, or if you prefer, according to practitioners, the real graph, if I may say, it's not the one that I have just shown you, which by the way, it's in the dotted line here reported for sake of comparison. So this one is the RE of the previous graph. This is the RA of the previous graph, while these bold lines are the alternative description according to the practitioners. The practitioner would say that actually in practice we observe that RE doesn't increase according to the proposition number 2 of Modigliani-Miller, which means that it doesn't increase according to this dotted line, but it increases more smoothly. And if that's the case, you no longer have an RA which is a flat line, arithmetically I mean, you will have an RA that is U-shaped. It's a U-shaped curve. And what are the consequences of adopting these more, according to some observer, more realistic view of the graph vis-a-vis the original conclusion of Modigliani-Miller? This is something that we're gonna see after the lunch break. Okay, so I hope I will see you back at 2 p.m. here in this room, including Francesca adesso, and have a nice lunch. Okay, see you later.